In today's video, we're going to be painting up a half-orc barbarian from the Pathfinder wizkids range. Okay, so the first step we're going to do is what we're going to do now is we're going to come in with goblin green to be painting up our half-orc barbarian skin tone. And the good thing about these models is we don't need to prime them because they already come pre-primed. So that's one step we can cut out pretty easily. So just coming in now with our goblin green, really giving a nice bright greenish tone with our half-orc barbarian here, just trying to get it everywhere where there's any skin showing, like the face and the hands. So don't forget about places like those. Now I have just watered down the paint with just a touch of water, so sort of 1 to 2 drops of water per dollop of paint that I'm putting down. I may have gone a little bit thin here, but that's okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to wait for it to dry and then place on a second layer anyway. Okay, so now that we have all the orc's skin all painted up, we're going to come in now with Vallejo Smoke. Now this color is actually quite thin as it is already. It's more of like sort of a wash or like one of the contrast paints. Just my bottle seems to be really thin, so I don't have to water this down at all. And it's just a nice brown color, rather than a grey colour, which I thought a smoke would be, but it turns out it's this nice brown colour, and it's really good for setting into the recesses and stuff. Acts very similar to a contrast paint, so you could easily come in here with a brown contrast paint or just some brown paint watered down to really get in between those gaps in the fur of his cloak. Okay, so now once we have his cloak all painted up and dry, we're going to come in now with some hemp rope, and we're going to be using hemp rope to be painting up all his cloth that he has on him. So he has like these this cloth skirt sort of around his body here, so just picking out the areas where you can see that cloth nice and easily, and it's sort of a rough worn yellow color here, but you may wish to go with either a brown or even a completely different color entirely, like a bright red. But the reason why I haven't gone with a brown here is because we're going to be using quite a few different browns on this model. Since he's a nice tribal orc here, so I want to keep that tribal thing going, like he finds his own materials. So we're going to be adding a lot of brown, so that's why I've come in here with this hemp rope color to just make that cloth pop out a little bit more. So bear that in mind when you're painting this. If you want to paint it up with all these different browns, it could certain sections could get lost. So I'm also just painting up here. He has sort of a cloth wrap around his legs as well, so give those a color pretty much the same as what we're doing here. Okay, so once we have all those areas of cloth painted up, we're going to come in now with some fur brown. And we'll be using the fur brown to be doing the pants of our half-orc barbarian here, so just being careful to avoid the areas we've already painted. Come in with a smaller brush if you need to, because there is a lot of overlapping areas with the cloth and the fur and stuff there, so don't be afraid to switch to a smaller brush if you need to. And we're just making sure that we get a nice good coverage over the whole pants as well. Now I'm also going to be doing the bottom of the feet area as well. I'm just going to be painting this all over with the fur brown too, but we're going to come back in with another brown just a little bit later on to paint the bottoms of his boots. But I want to get that nice fur detail he has where the pants come down and really make it look like that cloth that we painted up in the last step has wrapped around his fur pants. Okay, so now that we have our Orc Barbarian's pants painted up, we're going to come in now with our oak brown, and what we're going to be doing with this is we're going to be doing the part that I just said before. We're just painting up just the bottom of his boots here, because we want a nice dark leather boot, because we're going with that. He's made most of his clothing and armor with scraps he's either hunted or found here, so to tie with that we want to go with a nice dark leather boot here. And don't forget to also paint the handle of the axe too in this dark oak brown. We want to give a nice coverage there, and we want to give a nice dark color to the handle of that axe as well. Okay, now with his boots and the handle of his axe painted up, we're going to come in now with some leather brown. I'm going to be using the leather brown to be painting up the rest of his armor that we haven't painted up. So we want to go with his gauntlets he has on his arms here, his shoulder pads. He also has just a few bits of leather on his sort of leather skirt there as well, so I want to pick those out too. So it's giving a nice paint job here. Being careful now to avoid painting over areas we've already painted, because we want to avoid painting over areas we've already painted again, to save as much work as we can on ourselves and speed this process up. So you can see here I'm being relatively careful when getting close to the areas we've already painted up. But if you do, don't worry, it's just as simple as either waiting for it to dry or coming in immediately as quickly as you can with a wet brush. So what you do is you either grab another brush or get all the paint off this brush and quickly come in with a wet brush and just pull it away as fast as you can. Is another way to get rid of it. But generally waiting for it to dry and painting back over it, especially in these steps, is a little bit easier to do and can leave a better finish while we're painting these areas. So don't forget to also paint up little pockets that he has around him as well. Okay, so now we have all his armor and the other little leather bits around him. We're going to come in now with mahogany from Vallejo, which is another brown here. And we're going to be painting up the belt of this orc. So just being careful now, coming in with all those areas. You can see I've just spilt a little bit on the orc's chest here, so I'll just wait for that to dry, come back in with my original green to dab it on and just tidy that area up that I just missed. Accidentally painted over, I mean, sorry. And we also want to be making sure that we also paint up our club mace thing he has in his other hand with the skull on it. We want to make sure we get that there too with the mahogany brown. Like I said, we're using a lot of browns on this model, so a good way is to vary them up with different colors so you can make them stand out from one another. Okay, now that we have all those pieces complete, what we're going to do now is we're going to come in with some dark stone. I'm going to be using dark stone to be painting up our half-orc barbarian's facial hair and the hair on his head. So it's coming in here with a reasonably fine-tipped brush. I probably should have used a bit smaller brush than I'm using here so I could really get into that area. But as you can see, and I've just watered it down a little bit so I can get it into the recesses and make it really get into the areas where all that hair detail is. And then what I'm going to do is wait for it to dry and come back with our skin color to tidy up those areas where we've painted over accidentally. Okay, now that we have his facial hair and everything painted up, we're going to come in now with some skeleton bone. And of course we're going to be using the skeleton bone to be painting the skull on this mace that he has here, and making sure we just get a good quick coverage on that. Now you may want to do this as it's a nice metal engraving or something like that, but I want it to be an actual skull that he's taken from an enemy. So just going in there with the skeleton bone, making sure to give a good coverage on that. So now we have that skull all painted up and dry and complete. We're going to come in now with some matte white. Now with the matte white, we're going to be doing some really fine detail work here, which is we're going to be putting in the eyes of this model. Now you can skip this step if you want, if you find it extremely difficult, like I do. I find it really difficult, but I want to keep pushing myself on these videos. So I grab the thinnest brush I have and place just a tiny dot on the end of my brush and just dab it into the areas where the eyes are, which is luckily that these things have really good sculpts of where the eyes are, so I've got a good outline of where they are. And then if I accidentally go over the area or go too much outside of the eye, I'll just come back in with our original skin color to tidy that up. So once we have his eyes all painted up, it's time to come in now with some gunmetal from Vallejo. And of course, with being gunmetal, what we're going to do is we're going to be painting up all the middle areas on our orc. Now he does have some like chainmail here on his skirt, so this is a good bit of detail to pop out against all that leather working and cloth work that we've already done on here. So just going to add in another nice color. And then of course we have the head of the axe. Now there's also like a spiky crown on our mace here. Now I'm not going to be doing this in the metal color that we're using here with our gunmetal. I'm actually going to be using another metal color to differentiate that part there. But by all means, if you've only got a gunmetal or just a silver metal, go ahead and do that on this part. And then you also want to do this little bit of studded metal here on his shoulder piece as well. Don't forget to do that bit when you're going around doing all the metal. Okay, so now what we're going to be doing is we're going to come in with rough iron. Now this is the part where I said I'm going to be using a different metal color to be doing this. So I'm using this rough iron, which is this really dark black sort of metal here, and I want it to just really pop out against our skull that we've got here, so make it look like he's wearing this like iron crown that he's placed on there with sort of this rough, jagged, pointy thing on here. So I thought I'd give it that sort of dark, menacing look on there, and also just differentiate it since we've already got a bright colour with our skeleton bone that we used on there to paint that. So giving it a nice dark colour to pop out against that is just a cool idea I have. Remember, this is totally optional. If you've only got the silver colours, go ahead and use that. Okay, so now that we have his mace all painted up, what I'm going to do now is we're going to come in with some castle grey, and we're just going to be using castle grey to be painting up the base of our half-orc barbarian here, just giving a nice quick and easy paint job, making sure we give a good coverage to the whole thing. And also we just want to make sure we be a little bit careful around the areas where we've painted the boots and stuff on there, just trying to avoid all that. Okay, so now that we have his base completed and painted, what we're going to do now is we're going to start moving on to washes. Starting with flesh wash, we're going to be coming in and placing the flesh wash all over the orc's skin here. Of course, like it says, it's a flesh wash, so we want to covering all of our flesh. Now I'm also going to be painting over the hair and that as well, just to tie those areas together, and since it's a reddish brown colour, it also gives a little bit more depth to the hair colour as well while we're painting it on these models. So that's why I always like to go over with the flesh wash on the hair as well. And of course, don't forget about our little skull here, because I want it to make it look more like it's a recent skull rather than a slightly more older skull, so that's why I'm going over with the flesh wash here as well. Okay, so once all that flesh wash is dry, what we're going to do now is we're going to come in with some agrax earthshade. And we're going to be using agrax earthshade to pretty much cover 90% of the rest of the model we have here. So we want to be going over all the furs, the leather, our cloth, but being very careful to avoid the areas that are metal that we've painted up. So that's our little bits of chain that he has here on his skirt, his axe, and the little parts left on the mace. So just trying to avoid all those areas. Now, don't forget again, so with this agrax earthshade, while we're covering all the fur and stuff, don't forget you can place it on the base as well. Going to give the base a nice sort of earthy texture on top of the grey we've got in here to make it look sort of like a real, either like stone cabin floor, just a stone out in the wild lands. So making sure to give all those areas a good nice coverage in the agrax earthshade. Okay, so once that agrax earthshade is nice and dry, we're going to come in now with some nuln oil. And we're going to be using the nuln oil for wherever we didn't use the agrax earthshade on. So that's just the middle areas. So we want to go over areas like the head of the axe, our tip of the mace there, where we have the iron crown sort of on there, and just on the parts that we have on the middle. So just a nice quick step to go in here, undo that. Okay, so once all those washes are completely dry, what we're going to do now is we're going to come in with some ash grey. I'm going to be using the ash grey to dry brush on just over top of our base here. So dry brushing is just grabbing a old brush. For me, I'm using a cheap makeup brush, which actually make really good dry brushes, I've noticed, and placing it onto a paper towel, getting off 90% of the paint, and then just with the remaining paint just making quick passes on the area to pick out the high points of detail. And then once we've completed that dry brushing, what we're going to do now is we're going to come in with some chainmail silver, which is a lighter silver color than we use with our gunmetal, and I'm just picking out the edges here of the axe to give it like that highlighted shine, and just picking out some of the places where it will be on high points where the sun would naturally shine on these areas. So it's just a nice cool bit of added detail to really make your miniature pop a little bit more than you think it would on the table. And with that, we have finished painting up our Barbarian half-orc from the Pathfinder wizkids range. I hope this has been useful for you, and we can see here that just quickly adding in all those different colours of browns and just popping it out there with the hemp rope has really made it pop out against all those browns we've used. So I hope this has been useful to you, whether you want to paint along or you just enjoy watching me paint up some cool minis. So thank you all for watching. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't, and I'll see you guys all in the next one.